The most powerful person in all of college football is Eli Drinkwitz's agent.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on the basketball court, I've noticed some trends so far, not just in college, but in the NBA too. I think the Tigers are seemingly taking the lead on one of them. I think they should fall onto the bandwagon on another. Plus, I want to make the case for why Ahmad Hardy should win the Doke Walker Award. And you know what? If people are thinking Eli Drinkwitz was being greedy in this whole scenario here, I got to say, it's time to grow up a little bit. But you know what? Before I start the show, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And I got to say, Eli Drinkwitz, yeah, he's the most powerful guy in Missouri, but the most powerful man in college football has got to be Jimmy Sexton, his agent. Not only, of course, the agent of Eli Drinkwitz, of Kirby Smart, formerly and, well, perhaps currently as well, of Nick Saban. Well, Jimmy Sexton currently has 14 of the 16 SEC coaches under his umbrella. I mean, Standard Oil is jealous of that particular market share. And for all the people who are maybe a little bit turned off by Drinkwitz after getting yet another extension at Missouri, hey, I can understand why it puts a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth. But I'm just going to tell you this, there are a lot of things about this sport these days that leave a bad taste in someone's mouth. And I'll just say, greedy? Well, greedy compared to who? Certainly not compared to Lane Kiffin. And I'll just say to this idea that Eli Drinkwitz held Missouri up for his own gain, well, if that's true, then Clark Lee, another Jimmy Sexton client, by the way, at a place called Vanderbilt that is even more resource-strapped compared to the rest of the conference than Missouri. Well, Jimmy Sexton just did the same thing for Clark Lee, getting him a raise, not only of his salary, but importantly, well, guarantees not only in front of the scenes, but behind the scenes, the staff, NIL, all of that kind of stuff. And my point here is that mostly, I don't know, I just have some experience in the big kid pool the last few years here, so maybe I'm looking at this a little bit differently. Don't get me wrong, nothing compared to what Eli Drinkwitz and Lane Kiffin and Jimmy Sexton are up to. But I did have a pretty big project the last couple of years that has still been ongoing, by the way. But I've definitely thought that at times, you know what, I'm a little bit too nice. And I wish I had somebody who was a little bit, well, more direct and just totally on my side. And frankly, a person who isn't me to be the bad guy. Well, that's why you hire Jimmy Sexton. You hire Jimmy Sexton to let him do his thing. Because guess what? If you think Eli Drinkwitz has been, well, a little bit cutthroat here, maybe behind the scenes, what do you think the people he's negotiating with are? You think all the people at the University of Missouri, the University of, well, at LSU, Penn State, all these other places, you think these people behind the scenes, you think they're not cutthroat? You think they didn't get to their positions of power for a reason? So again, if you want to swim in these shark-infested waters of college football, especially in the SEC, well, I hate to say it, you need somebody like Jimmy Sexton. So to me, if Eli Drinkwitz gets a little bit more cheese on his Whopper, that's really not my concern. My concern is winning football at this point. If you want to go back to the old days when people couldn't transfer and they stayed around longer and it was all about, more about, at least seemingly, the alma mater and not just about money, and it was more about education, that's all fine and dandy. Unfortunately, that reality no longer exists. This is the current reality in which we reside. So I, as a Missouri fan, whatever it takes for the Tigers to win at this point, I'm okay with it. It's time to grow up, people. The fantasy world of college football that we all sort of grew up with in our minds probably never existed anyway, but it's certainly already dead at this point. And when it comes to, by the way, winning, well, obviously now that Eli Drinkwitz got a little bit more cheese on his Whopper, got some more guarantees off the field, well, it's time to earn that money, quite simply, by making some really hard decisions. Well, just about 3 years or so ago, 2-3 years or so before the 2023 season, Eli Drinkwitz gave up play calling duties and hired an offensive coordinator. And that surely was a tough decision for Eli Drinkwitz or any other coach. These guys are control freaks. Almost exclusively are college football coaches. So I'm sure that was a tough decision for him to do, to give up the reins of play calling. And yet that's a move that has obviously paid off. Well, on play calling, on special teams, on the quarterback position, on the offensive line, just the roster in general, well, a lot of tough decisions are going to have to be made. It's time to make some more. The last one paid off. Well, it's time to make some more because, simply put, Missouri's offense, just the passing game in general, just wasn't good enough this year. And, you know, I had some Missouri fans, one in particular, say that, hey, you were too hard on the Missouri passing game. That was horrible weather. The ball was slippery, all that kind of stuff. Missouri was running the ball incredibly effectively. They didn't really need to pass. Well, that's certainly fair enough. That is a point that is well taken, and there's no doubt that you're correct there on all of those points. But I'm sorry, when you throw 4 passes, you attempt 4 passes in the first half, that was pretty unbelievable. And it'd be one thing if in the previous game against Oklahoma, again, Oklahoma's a great defense. Arkansas obviously is not. It's just the problem is the previous few weeks of the season, including the Alabama game all the way back to October, you know, it just hasn't been good enough. It'd be one thing if the Tigers had shown signs of life in the passing game outside of a bad weather, slippery type ball game against Arkansas. Hey, I'll give the long snapper excuses in that one because he was steady all season until the Arkansas game. But regardless of how you feel about the Arkansas game, I just don't know how you can go into this offseason and just run back everything you did this past offseason in the passing game. I'm not going to be presumptuous enough to tell Eli Drinkwitz he needs to fire this guy or transfer this guy out and transfer this guy in. I just don't think it's realistic to run back the exact same strategy and expect it to be any more effective. And speaking of being adults, I'm certainly not naive enough to say that Eli Drinkwitz, well, he'll never leave Missouri, or even naive enough to say that, hey, he may have considered. I certainly wouldn't dismiss the idea that Drinkwitz considered leaving this time around, perhaps. But I do think that Drinkwitz has enough integrity. And again, maybe I'm naive here. I just think he has enough integrity that he would not have pulled the Lane Kiffin move. I just don't think he would have bailed on a playoff team at Missouri. I just simply could not see it. And, well, I gave Lane Kiffin kind of the business on the reaction show yesterday with the SEC squad, and some people have called that reaction, not mine specifically, but just the criticism of Lane Kiffin, hypocritical, because John Sumrall is going to continue to coach for Tulane through a potential college football playoff run here while accepting a job at the University of Florida. So what's the difference between these two scenarios? Well, I think there's a pretty huge one in my opinion, but it's a good point to bring up. And also, yeah, I want to take Ahmad Hardy over Kewan Lacey for the Doke Walker Award. That's just me. But you know what? First, I do got to talk about Gametime. And you know what? A big one's coming, folks. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams for the first time ever. It's going to be a huge event. But you know what? The hardest part is obviously getting tickets. Well, that's why Gametime comes in clutch, giving fans an advantage. And with Gametime, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open. It makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You pick a game, tap a section, and you have your tickets locked within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for fine print. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. So once again, call me naive if you must. Call me a Pollyanna, whatever term you want to use. But I just don't think that if Eli Drinkwitz were in the exact same situation as Lane Kiffin, tempted as he might be to head off to LSU, for example, I just don't think he would abandon a Missouri team in the college football playoff. I just think, simply put, number one, the reason this bothers me is because, well, what are we even playing for? If we're not trying to win the college football playoff, then what is the point of all of this? I guess it is just to line the bank accounts of these coaches as much as possible. I guess that's the entire point of this sport. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Eli would never leave Missouri. But to bail on a playoff team, I just simply don't see it. And then there's this, by the way, a statement from Tulane's athletic director, basically put out a very classy statement, a milquetoast statement, if you will, in some ways saying that, hey, we appreciate John Sumrall. We're going to let him coach in the playoff. We wish him a lot of luck at Florida, all that type of deal. To which a lot of people are saying, well, hey, why didn't Ole Miss handle the Lane Kiffin situation this way? Well, I think maybe they should have, again, with another coach. Unfortunately, Lane Kiffin, I just don't think there was a realistic scenario where this was going to be a honky-dory, hey, things are all good on both ends situation, number one. Number two, also Tulane and Florida are not direct competitors, whereas Ole Miss and LSU are obviously direct competitors in the SEC for wins and losses, for recruits, and everything else. That just simply isn't the case with Tulane and Florida. That's a little bit easier of a move for Tulane to make, and quite simply, a program like Tulane, I mean, a college football playoff berth, I mean, that comes around probably about as often as Haley's Comet for a team like them. So they really have to hold on to it for dear life. And again, you could say maybe the same thing, a similar argument about Ole Miss. The problem is, again, I just don't see it as the same scenario because of the competitive situation. And as we saw, Lane Kiffin was quite happy to not only try to play both sides of the coin here by saying, I want to go to LSU and finish out this playoff run, but also basically try to use leverage and threaten his old team. You know, I'm sorry, under those circumstances, it's hard to see the honky-dory press release from Ole Miss and, oh yeah, let's work it out for the next month and try to win this thing. Really, Ole Miss probably short-term, just taking the defensive coordinator, you know, elevating him for this run. That's probably about as good as they were going to do. Long term, I don't know that that's the solution at all. I have no confidence in that whatsoever. But I'll just say this. It was interesting, too. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be some defections from Ole Miss who follow Lane to LSU. That's going to happen. But so far, it seems like Lane's leverage play, at least there, trying to get others to follow him, doesn't really seem like it worked. There was some leaked audio there where the Ole Miss players were quite excited. It seemed like that the DC was named the head coach there, and I think seemed like the Rebels are probably just tired of this stuff at this point. So, you know, again, it just goes to show you that while players these days, they may not have a ton of as much loyalty as their schools, that's obvious, as they maybe used to have. Well, they maybe don't have as much money to the head coaches as maybe Lane Kiffin and others thought too. The real loyalty might be to, hey, who's paying my checks? Are they still clearing? yeah, I'm loyal to the NIL collective. That's who I'm loyal to. By the way, just a quick other note on the coaching carousel. Mark Stoops fired by Kentucky, and just, well, the timing of that a little suspect. But I would like to think, by the way, from the Missouri perspective, that Luke Bowers' faked punt pass to Marquise Johnson was the play that definitely broke Kentucky in that football game. I'd like to think it broke Mark Stoops and his tenure. But you know what? I think, speaking of let's make the case for something, I think Ahmad Hardy should be your Doke Walker winner. And here's why. And by the way, I think there was some confusion by a couple of people who thought I was really being serious when I said there should be a running back controversy between Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts. Clearly, people, I was just being a little bit tongue-in-cheek there. Number one, they can both play. This isn't the quarterback position. We don't really need a controversy. Really, I was just trying to give Jamal Roberts credit, who's been tremendous this season, and if anything, has been overshadowed by Hardy's greatness. And understandably so. Hardy has been tremendous. And while you might look at somebody like erstwhile Missouri running back Kejuan Lacey, who's now with the Ole Miss Rebels, you might look at him and his numbers, and maybe they're a little bit more impressive in some ways. But I think context is really important here. Of course, Lane Kiffin, say what you want about the guy, he can certainly design an offense, and an effective one at that. And I think Lacey has certainly been the beneficiary of said offense. And certainly Trinidad Chambliss in that Ole Miss passing game, well, there's just no comparison. It's been much more effective than Missouri's passing game. So Ahmad Hardy has had to be effective and put up all of his big numbers with, well, a much higher degree of difficulty, in my humble opinion. So if that actually matters to anybody who votes for the Doke Walker Award, or maybe it's just all about total numbers, I'm not totally sure. Maybe it's a wins and losses award to some extent, then obviously Lacey is going to have the edge. But to me, Ahmad Hardy has at least been as good as anybody in the country. And I would argue, considering the defenses he's had to go against with a really, really limited passing game in most of those ball games, I think Hardy has been about as good as any Missouri fan could have possibly hoped. And you know what? I got to talk some basketball, too, because things are about to get serious for Mizzou hoops this week. Notre Dame in South Bend on Tuesday, the Jayhawks in KC on Sunday. You know what? Dennis Gates, I think, is ahead of the curve offensively as usual. And I think there's a trend in the NBA defensively, by the way, that maybe Missouri could glom onto a little bit. So let's talk some hoops coming up here in just a minute. But first, Omaha Steaks. Yes, if you've got somebody in your life who is tough to buy for, I'm just telling you, you could get them Omaha Steaks every single year, and I don't see how they could possibly complain. And you know what? This week is the best time to jump in because their cyber sale is here, and the deals are massive. I've given Omaha Steaks as a gift before, by the way, and the reaction is always the same. It's frankly, their jaws are on the ground. I've got to towel away the drool. It's really that good. And it's not just steaks. You're talking burgers, comfort meals, sides, desserts. It's one of those gifts that, again, really fits just about anybody. So save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That is just a massive deal you can stack on top. So that is omahasteaks.com. Promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. And of course, after a week off of school, I now have to run out the door here a minute quickly and go pick up my kids now for an early closing snow day. Perfect. Gotta love where my dollars are going. No, I'm kidding, folks. But here's what I'm not kidding about. Speaking of moving quickly, you know what? The full court press has become a bit of a trend early on in the NBA this season. I think largely due to the NBA Finals last year, the Indiana Pacers, well, picked up the ball full court quite a bit, especially with their second unit. I think that's a trend that maybe Missouri can jump onto a little bit, especially with T.O. Barrett, a guy who off the bench is really a defensive menace, just a big body too for a point guard. Ostensibly, defensively, if he's picking you up the entire game that he's out there, man, that's going to be a real problem. Not only are you going to wear down the opposition, hopefully force some turnovers, obviously, but your sixth defender defensively is the shot clock. If you can just simply make the other team shave a few of those precious seconds off of the shot clock, well, their efficiency offensively is just going to go down a bit. It's very obvious if you look at a stat sheet, a spreadsheet, whatever you want to call it, the earlier you can get up shots, generally speaking, well, the better you're going to do. And that makes sense when you think about it. Not only is that, well, hey, if you get the ball up court quickly, you can maybe catch the defense when it's not set, but also in the half court, if your early action is working, that means you're getting up a shot probably quickly, means you're getting up a good shot. And instead of, hey, late shot clock, well, now we got to kind of go one-on-one and make something happen, that's not going to be as efficient of a shot, again, as your earliest first option in the half court, whether that's a pass into the post, a kick out for a three, whatever it might be. One other trend I've definitely noticed in the NBA, like the Miami Heat, for example, hey, the last 10 years, I would say plus, basketball's become very much a ball screen type of sport. In other words, let's run a lot of pick and rolls at the top of the key in particular. Well, some teams, in particular the Miami Heat, have gone the other way. They've started just not running nearly as many ball screens or even off the ball screens, just passing the ball around and moving the ball and trying to look for driving lanes instead of, bringing in basically what I would say a lot of this is probably, hey, the pick and roll thing's getting maybe a tiny bit stale. Defenses have adjusted and know how to gum up the works. They have the type of defenders now that take away some of the efficiency of those plays. That's something I think I've noticed with Missouri. I think Dennis Gates might be onto this trend as well. I don't have the stats for you like I do with the Miami Heat, for example. One of their best players, Bam Adebayo, is setting single-digit screens a game after setting, 30 or 40, something crazy like that in the previous season. Just shows the point is a real trend change there in the NBA. I've just noticed I don't notice Missouri setting as many ball screens as they did last year either. It just seems like we're just kind of passing the ball around, get it into Mark Mitchell, wait for him to draw a double team, kick it out, look for a driving lane, all of that kind of stuff. So, again, that's just something I'm watching here. I don't know if I'm totally convinced that that's the case, but considering how ahead of the curve and at the very least Dennis Gates seems to be offensively, I think it's quite possible. And by the way, speaking of offense, Missouri got some good offense in the second half just out of Trent Burns getting double-teamed and passing over the top of the defense to Jacob Cruz on the opposite side of the court. Cruz knocked down a couple of three-pointers off that action. Be curious to see how Burns, at his size, if he's a good passer out of a double team, he can be a real weapon simply just with that, because in college basketball, the ball goes into the post. It's just about inevitable that you're going to get double teamed. If you can pass over the top of the defense to open shooters from Missouri, that can be a real weapon, a real second unit offensive type weapon. It seems like Burns was really looking for Cruz there. Maybe they have some chemistry. But by the way, speaking of offense, I do think that, ironically, even though Missouri's been one of the best three-point shooting teams in terms of accuracy so far this season, they haven't taken a ton of threes, at least compared to the rest of the country. And I got to say, it seemed like Dennis Gates got a little bit annoyed with his squad in the second half when they maybe got a little bit lazy and were taking too mmany three-pointers. For as much as Dennis Gates talks about, hey, I want my team to lead the country and three-pointers taken, well, not since his first season, they've never really been particularly close to doing that. I actually think what Dennis is saying there. I think he just wants to have all of his guys to have the confidence to shoot that shot. He doesn't want to necessarily see them just settle for it and have that be the main action. Because I'll tell you this, I think Missouri is at its best when the main action, the main threat, for example, is Anthony Robinson driving to the basket, or even more so, Mark Mitchell in the post or driving to the basket. When that's the main action and the three-pointer is what you punish off of that main action, that's when Missouri is at its best. And I think Dennis Gates, based on, well, the side eyes that I was seeing him give his bench late in that previous ball game, I think he might well agree with me. But hey, thanks as always for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. For your second listen, my goodness, just check out the plethora of options we have here on the network, including Locked On Chiefs, Locked On the St. Louis Cardinals, Locked On the Royals, all that good stuff. Hey, it's what makes Locked On the #1 sports podcast network out there. And you know what? Until next time, I am John Miller. Thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.